Okay, so picture this for a second.
Yeah.
It is a completely random Tuesday morning.
Right.
You open your eyes, you look up at the ceiling, and you just like brace yourself for it.
Oh, yeah, the dread.
Exactly. You know that feeling, right? That immediate stomach-dropping spike of cortisol.
Oh, absolutely.
You're doing the mental math of the commute, the overflowing inbox, the calendar invites, the boss who needs that quarterly report by noon.
Right, the whole routine.
But then, as you're lying there, something entirely different happens. The panic it doesn't come.
Huh.
You take a breath, the room is completely quiet, and you realize with absolute crystal clarity, I can do whatever I want today.
Wow,
Like you can get up right now, or you can literally roll over and sleep for another 2 hours. You could read a book cover to
Oh,
cover.
okay, for a hike or something.
Exactly. 3-hour hike. You can start learning how to build a cabin, or you could, just sit on your front porch and watch the clouds move. That visceral, physical sensation in your chest, that total absence of forced obligation, that is exactly what we are digging into today in this deep dive.
It's such a powerful image.
Because usually when we talk about wealth, we talk about, accumulation, right? We talk about the visible scorecard,
Yeah.
the luxury cars, the massive houses.
The commas in the bank account.
Exactly, the commas. But what if we've completely, totally misunderstood the math?
I mean, we probably have.
Right. What if the ultimate currency, like the absolute highest dividend that money can ever possibly pay, isn't the physical object at all?
Yeah.
What if it's simply autonomy, the control over your own time?
It's a profound reframing, really. And honestly, it requires us to fight against decades of super heavy societal conditioning.
For sure.
Because from a very young age, success is modeled for us as an accumulation of visible assets.
Right, like buy this thing to prove you made it.
Exactly. You are taught to work hard specifically to buy the bigger house, to wear the designer clothes, to drive the impressive car. It is a highly visible external metric of success.
Yeah, the classic American dream stuff.
Right. But if we look at the underlying mechanics of human happiness, what you might call the universal fuel of joy, that external scorecard frequently operates as a blueprint for a trap.
A trap. Really?
Yeah, I mean, happiness is obviously a deeply subjective experience. What brings you immense joy might bore me to tears, right?
Oh, boy.
But when you strip away the superficial layers, the hobbies, the specific preferences, the foundational element consistently comes down to control.
Huh.
It is the ability to direct your own life, to do what you want, when you want, with who you want, for exactly as long as you want.
I mean, I think we all intuitively feel that. When you put it like that, control over your time, it sounds like the most obvious thing in the world.
Yeah.
But I'm looking at my own life, and I'm looking at the culture around us,
Yeah.
and it seems like we do the exact opposite.
They really do.
Like, people are working 80, 90 hours a week, destroying their health,
Yeah.
entirely to afford a lifestyle
Right.
that they never actually have the time to sit down and enjoy.
Yeah. The ironies are everywhere.
It makes you wonder, if you are highly compensated for giving away every waking hour of your freedom, are you actually wealthy? Or are you just, like, the best paid captive in the room?
The best paid captive. That's a great way to put it.
But of course, it's super easy for us to sit here and philosophize about this. It sounds great in theory. To really understand if this holds up, I want to look at the historical psychology of this.
Okay, yeah. Let's do that.
Because my understanding is that for a long time, the scientific community didn't even care about what made people happy, right? Like, they were entirely focused on the negative.
That's exactly right. And understanding that history is actually crucial to grasping why the data on autonomy was so revolutionary when it finally emerged.
Okay, lay it on me.
Well, if you look at the landscape of psychology from its modern dawn, let's say from Freud, all the way through the mid-20th century, the entire field was overwhelmingly, almost exclusively, focused on pathology.
So just the bad stuff.
Yeah, it was a triage discipline.
Triage, like a battlefield hospital.
Precisely like that. I mean, think about the historical context. You had 2 world wars, massive economic depressions.
Oh, right.
Psychologists were tasked with dealing with profound trauma. They dedicated their careers to understanding depression, anxiety, schizophrenia, neuroses, PTSD, though they called it shell shock back then.
Sure.
The entire medical model of psychology was deficit-based. The goal was to take someone who was suffering, someone who was functioning below a baseline of 0, and try to bring them back up to a neutral state of normal functioning.
So it's like taking your car to the mechanic only when the engine is literally smoking.
Yes.
You aren't asking the mechanic, hey, how do I make this car perform like a Formula One racer? You're just asking, how do I make it stop being on fire?
That is a perfect analogy. No one was studying the Formula One cars of human emotion.
Wow.
But that began to shift, and a pivotal figure in that shift was a psychologist named Angus Campbell.
Okay, Angus Campbell.
Right. He was at the University of Michigan, and in the lead up to his landmark 1981 book, which was called The Sense of Wellbeing in America, he asked a completely different question.
Which was?
He essentially said, instead of only looking at why people are miserable, why don't we systematically study the positive spectrum? What actually makes people thrive?
So he was looking for, like, the common denominator of joy.
Exactly. He wanted to find the common denominator.
And, I mean, if you ask the average person on the street in 1981, frankly, if you ask them today what that common denominator was, I guarantee they'd give you a list of demographics.
Oh, for sure.
They would say, well, the happiest people are the ones who make over $100,000 a year. They live in Southern California, so the weather is perfect, and they have a master's degree.
Right, right.
Because we just assume objective conditions dictate our internal state.
We absolutely do assume that. And that is precisely what Campbell's data completely dismantled.
Oh, really?
Yeah. He conducted massive, sweeping surveys looking at all those objective conditions you just mentioned: income, geography, education level, age, gender.
Yeah.
And statistically, those demographic buckets were incredibly unreliable predictors of happiness.
Wait, really? Geography doesn't matter. Income doesn't matter.
Well, I wouldn't say they don't matter at all, but they don't predict sustained well-being.
Okay, I see.
Campbell realized you couldn't just group people by income and assume the higher earners were happier. You couldn't group them by education and assume the PhDs were more joyful than the high school graduates.
Because there's miserable people in every group.
Exactly. Within every single one of those objective categories, the high earners, the highly educated, the people living in perfect climates, he found massive populations of people who were chronically, deeply unhappy. The objective conditions of their lives, the exact things society tells us we should sacrifice our time to achieve, were not acting as a reliable shield against misery.
So he's sifting through all this data, finding that money and degrees and constant sunshine aren't the secret sauce.
Right.
What was the thread then? What was the one thing that actually moved the needle across all those different groups of people?
The finding was elegantly simple, yet incredibly difficult for most people to actually implement.
Lay it on me.
Campbell concluded, and the empirical data back this up relentlessly, that having a strong sense of controlling one's life is a more dependable predictor of positive feelings of well-being than any of the objective conditions of life he had considered.
A more dependable predictor.
Yes. Let's really unpack the weight of that. He's stating, as a matter of scientific record, that autonomy over your daily existence will bring you more reliable joy than your salary, more than the square footage of your house, more than the prestige of your job title.
Okay, I have to push back here a little bit. I'm struggling to separate these things.
Okay, go ahead.
Doesn't a high salary exactly equal control?
Yeah.
Why does Campbell, and why do we, separate them as if they are opposing forces?
That's the trap.
Because in my mind, if you have a massive salary, you can afford to buy control. You can hire a nanny. You can hire a personal chef. You can fly private, so you aren't waiting in TSA lines. Money buys autonomy.
Yeah.
So how can Campbell say autonomy is the predictor, not the money?
That is the exact friction point of modern society.
Well,
in theory, yes, money is a tool that can be used to purchase control.
Right.
But in practice, what we see over and over again is that the pursuit of that high salary requires the total, sometimes permanent, surrender of control.
Oh.
Let's look at a highly paid corporate executive. They might be earning $2 million a year. Objectively, top tier of global wealth.
Super rich.
Yeah, but if their phone is ringing at 11 p.m. on a Friday with a crisis they are absolutely obligated to solve, if they cannot turn off their email during their anniversary dinner, if they have to beg a board of directors for a week off just to attend their kid's graduation, do they truly have control?
Man, I see what you're saying. They have purchasing power, but they don't have temporal power.
Exactly. Temporal power. Campbell's data suggests that a person making a very modest, perfectly average income, but who operates as an independent contractor, someone who decides what time they wake up, who they take on as a client, and when they put the tools down for the day.
Yeah.
That person is statistically far more likely to experience a high baseline of daily well-being than the micromanaged $2 million a year executive. The autonomy overrides the luxury.
That makes a terrifying amount of sense. It actually reminds me of how I feel about video games.
Oh, yeah. How so?
Imagine there's a massive open-world video game you absolutely love. You fire it up on a Saturday afternoon. It's totally
Yeah.
voluntary. You are fully immersed, and you're just having the time of your life.
Okay, sounds great.
Now, imagine a scenario where someone kicks down your door, forces you into a chair, points a weapon at you, and says, you're going to play this exact same video game for the next 14 hours straight.
Oh, wow. Okay.
You cannot pause it. You cannot go to the bathroom. And if you mess up a level, there are dire physical consequences.
That sounds horrible.
Right. But you are performing the exact same mechanical actions.
Yeah.
You're looking at the exact same screen.
Yeah.
But the psychological experience has shifted from pure joy to absolute torture. The entire difference is literally just the removal of voluntary control.
That is an excellent way to conceptualize it. You are describing the shift from intrinsic motivation, doing something purely because the act itself is rewarding, to extrinsic coercion.
Extrinsic coercion.
And human biology absolutely rebels against extrinsic coercion. In fact, what you're describing in that video game analogy leads us directly into a deeply ingrained psychological phenomenon.
Okay.
It's a phenomenon that ruins careers, destroys passions, and explains exactly why people end up hating what they thought was their absolute dream job.
Wait, are you talking about the investment banking trap? Because there is an anecdote about exactly this kind of career destruction in our source material that I found so relatable, even though I've personally never set foot on Wall Street.
Yes. The classic pursuit of the elite, high-paying profession. Let's look at the mechanics of that anecdote because it perfectly illustrates the Campbell data in real time.
So the story follows this college student who has this singular burning desire to become an investment banker. And the motivation wasn't altruistic, right? It wasn't about a deep love for financial modeling.
No, not at all.
It was purely 100% about the money. The equation in their head was super simple. High salary equals high happiness.
That's a standard assumption.
Yeah. So they grind, they network, they do everything right, and they land a highly competitive summer internship at a major bank in Los Angeles during their junior year. They walk in on day one thinking, I've won the lottery. I am on the fast track to the good life.
And this is exactly where the reality of how that money is generated violently collides with human psychology.
How so?
Because on that very first day, the hidden cost of the salary becomes apparent. The intern discovers that investment bankers make exorbitant amounts of money precisely because they endure working hours that are longer and more rigidly controlled than the human nervous system is designed to handle.
The details of the hours in the text are just grim. The intern noted that going home before midnight was considered a luxury. Midnight.
Yeah, that's absurd.
And then there was this overarching culture of absolute totalitarian ownership over the employee's time. The office literally had a saying, and I quote, "If you don't come to work on Saturday, don't bother coming back on Sunday."
Wow.
It is literally the video game at gunpoint scenario.
Now, here is where we need to look really closely at the psychological friction, because the fascinating part of this story isn't just that the hours were long.
Right.
The intern explicitly notes that the actual tasks, the financial modeling, the spreadsheets, the analysis, were intellectually stimulating. They actually liked the mechanics of the work.
Just like the video game.
Exactly. It paid incredibly well. It carried immense social status. They wanted to work hard. But all of those positive attributes, the money, the prestige, the intellectual challenge, were completely vaporized by one fatal flaw.
The total loss of autonomy.
Yes. Every single waking second of their time became a slave to the boss's demands. They couldn't choose when to start, when to stop, or how to execute the work.
Yeah.
And that complete eradication of control was enough to turn a dream scenario into an absolute nightmare. Keep in mind, this internship was only scheduled to last for 4 months. It had a defined end date.
And how long did they last?
They only lasted 1 month before they quit.
They tapped out after 4 weeks of their ultimate dream job. And there's a sentence the intern uses to describe the aftermath that just hit me like a ton of bricks.
Which one?
They said, "The hardest thing about this was that I loved the work. But doing something you love on a schedule you can't control can feel the same as doing something you hate."
It's so true.
How does that happen, though? How does the brain take something it inherently enjoys and completely invert the experience just because a clock is involved?
The mechanism behind this is a fundamental psychological principle called reactance.
Reactance.
Yeah. Jonah Berger, a marketing professor at the University of Pennsylvania, has done extensive work on this. To understand reactance, we really have to look at our evolutionary biology.
Okay, take me back.
Human beings, over hundreds of thousands of years, evolved a hardwired need to feel like they are in the driver's seat of their own lives.
Makes sense.
In an evolutionary context, if you didn't have autonomy, if you were constantly controlled by others, you were likely being exploited, which meant significantly lower chances of survival. Autonomy is a survival mechanism.
So when someone tells us what to do, our brain perceives it as a literal threat.
Exactly. When an external force, a boss, a client, a rigid schedule tries to compel us to do something, even if it is an activity we genuinely enjoy and might have chosen to do on our own, our brain detects a loss of agency. The perception shifts instantly from, I am choosing to do this, to, they are forcing me to do this.
And then what?
And when that shift occurs, reactance kicks in. Our psychological defense mechanism is to push back. We dig our heels in. We suddenly feel exhausted by the task. We might deliberately do it poorly, or we simply begin to despise the activity.
Why?
It is the brain's desperate attempt to reclaim the driver's seat by rejecting the coercion. The external control completely overwrites and neutralizes the internal motivation.
Okay, I want to apply this to something we see everywhere today, because if reactance is real and doing something you love on a forced schedule makes you hate it, what about the entire modern hustle culture?
Oh, that's a perfect example.
Right, because I'm genuinely struggling with this math.
Yeah.
Let's say someone has a hobby they absolutely adore, woodworking or graphic design or baking. It brings them pure Campbell-level joy. Then society tells them, hey, you're so good at that, you should monetize it. Turn it into a side hustle. So they do. They start taking custom orders. Shouldn't that double their happiness?
Yeah.
You have the joy of the craft plus the joy of the income. Where does the math break down?
The math breaks down because of a phenomenon closely related to reactance called the over-justification effect.
Over-justification effect.
Yes. When you take an intrinsically rewarding activity, baking, for the sheer joy of baking, and you attach an external reward and external constraints to it.
Like a client paying you to deliver a 3-tier wedding cake by 8:00 a.m. on Saturday.
Exactly. The brain reclassifies the activity. It's no longer play, it's an obligation. The moment your sanctuary becomes dictated by client demands, strict deadlines, and feeding a social media algorithm to get more orders, your autonomy is gone.
And then the reactance kicks in.
Precisely. Within a year, that person doesn't even want to look at an oven. They experience massive reactance against their own passion.
That is so sad, but so true.
It really is. This is why the classic career advice, do what you love and you'll never work a day in your life, is structurally flawed.
It's terrible advice.
It is incomplete advice, at best. A far more psychologically accurate piece of advice would be, do what you love, but fiercely, ruthlessly protect your autonomy over how and when you do it. Because if you don't control the schedule, the reactance will eventually poison the passion.
Wow. Okay, so if lack of control is the ultimate poison and autonomy is the ultimate wealth, the logical next question is practical, right? How do we actually use our money to buy that control?
Yes, the practical application.
Because I think a lot of people listening to this are nodding along, but they're thinking, sure, that's easy to say if you have $10 million. I'm just trying to make rent and pay off my student loans. I don't have the luxury of autonomy.
That's a very common and very understandable reaction.
But there is a concept we need to explore here from the text that completely changes that narrative. Wealth buying time is not a binary switch. You aren't either a miserable peasant or a totally free billionaire. It's a spectrum.
The spectrum of freedom is perhaps the most actionable, empowering concept we can discuss today.
I agree.
We are completely conditioned to view financial independence as an all-or-nothing destination. You hit a specific, massive net worth, you pop champagne, and you never work again.
Right, the retirement myth.
But that ignores the incremental power of money.
Yeah.
The true intrinsic value of money, the absolute highest dividend it pays, is not what it can purchase in terms of consumer goods.
Okay, what is it then?
Its highest value is its ability to act as a buffer. Every single dollar of unspent assets you accumulate buys you a tiny slice of autonomy against the unpredictability of the world.
Okay, let's walk up this ladder step by step, because I want everyone listening to visualize exactly where they are on this spectrum right now and what the next step actually looks like.
Good idea.
The very first level, like the baseline foundation of purchased freedom, isn't a yacht. It's just a tiny bit of savings, a small financial buffer.
Right.
And what did that buy you? It buys you the ability to get sick without your life completely falling apart.
Which is profoundly significant.
It really is. If someone listening has never lived paycheck to paycheck, they might not understand the sheer physiological terror of this. If you have zero buffer and you get the flu and you have to miss 3 days of hourly work, you might not make rent.
Yeah.
Your electricity might get shut off. Your entire existence is dictated by your physical vulnerability. Having just enough unspent assets to take a few days off work when you're ill without facing financial ruin is a massive leap in autonomy. You have purchased the right to rest.
You eradicated an acute, immediate layer of chronic stress.
Yeah.
Your cortisol levels literally drop because you aren't living on the razor's edge.
Exactly.
And as you move slightly further up the spectrum, the psychological relief begins to compound. Let's say you build up a slightly larger buffer, maybe a couple of months of living expenses. What does that buy?
Tell me.
It buys you strategy over desperation.
Ooh, I like that. Strategy over desperation.
Yes, if you get laid off or if your company goes under, you don't have to panic and accept the very first job offer that comes your way just to survive.
You don't have to take a toxic job with a terrible boss just because the rent is due on the 1st.
Exactly. You have the breathing room to wait, to look for a good fit, to negotiate your salary. That relatively small amount of financial padding can alter the entire trajectory of your career, your earning potential, and your mental health for the next decade.
And then we hit what I think is the most fascinating milestone on the spectrum, the 6-month emergency fund.
Yeah.
Every single personal finance guru on earth tells you to have a 6-month emergency fund, right?
They do, yeah.
But they always sell it as a practical tool for physical disasters. What if your roof caves in? What if your car transmission explodes?
Right.
But the psychological framing here is entirely different. A 6-month emergency fund isn't about the roof, it's a psychological weapon. Having 6 months of expenses means you are no longer terrified of your boss.
This is where we connect back to the Campbell research and the concept of reactance.
Yes.
The entire power dynamic between employer and employee fundamentally shifts when the employee has a 6-month runway of unspent assets. The ultimate threat a boss has is termination.
Right. Do what I say or you're fired.
But if you know that being fired will not financially ruin you, if you know you have half a year to figure out your next move, that threat loses its paralyzing grip. You suddenly have a voice.
You can literally say, no, I'm not coming in on Sunday.
Exactly. You can set boundaries. You can refuse to compromise your ethics. You can negotiate from a position of profound security. That 6-month fund is tangible psychological armor.
It's basically FU money, but achieved on a practical middle-class scale. You don't need millions to say no. You just need 6 months of modest living expenses in a savings account.
Precisely. And as you keep moving up the spectrum, more wealth buys the freedom to actually lower your income in exchange for a better life.
Like taking a pay cut for remote work.
Exactly. You can take a job that pays 20% less but offers flexible hours. You can afford to live a little closer to work and buy back 2 hours of commuting time every day. Or you can face a massive medical emergency without the compounding trauma of wondering how you are going to pay the deductible.
And ultimately, at the far end of this spectrum, you reach the point where your unspent assets generate enough to cover your existence, buying you the ultimate autonomy, the ability to retire when you want to, rather than when your physical body completely gives out.
Right. The overarching thesis is that using your money to buy time, to buy options, and to buy a reduction in chronic fear provides a daily dividend of peace that no luxury good, no designer watch, no sports car, no vacation home can possibly compete with.
To really drive home how accessible this can be and how it completely defies our cultural definition of wealth, there's an incredible real-world example from the text. It's a story about a guy named Derek Sivers.
Ah, yes. The Sivers story is phenomenal.
Derek is a very successful entrepreneur. He founded a company called CDW, grew it massively, and eventually sold it for millions of dollars.
Millions, yeah.
But when people ask him to tell the story of how he got rich, he doesn't talk about the multi-million-dollar exit. He talks about his life at age 22.
Sivers' story is an absolute masterclass in the mathematics of autonomy. He recounts this conversation with a friend who wanted to know how he became wealthy.
Right.
And Sivers takes him back to when he was 22 years old, living in Midtown Manhattan. He was working a day job that paid him roughly $20,000 a year, which he explicitly notes was essentially minimum wage at the time.
Okay, let's just pause there for a second. A minimum wage job in Manhattan, that is traditionally the exact recipe for extreme financial anxiety.
Oh, absolutely.
But Sivers approached it with radical discipline. He engineered his entire existence to require as little external fuel as possible. He says he never ate out at restaurants, he never took a taxi, he walked everywhere or took the subway.
He was ruthless about his expenses.
Relentlessly optimized. He got his life to a point where his total cost of living was exactly $1,000 a month. But his take-home pay, was $1,800 a month.
So he's clearing $800 a month.
Exactly. On a minimum wage salary, he is banking $800 in unspent assets every single month. He does this consistently, without fail, for 2 years. And at the end of it, at age 22, he looks at his bank account and he has $12,000 saved up.
And that $12,000 is the pivot point of his entire life.
Why?
Because Seaver's ultimate goal wasn't to be a minimum wage office worker. He wanted to be a full-time musician. He ran math. He knew he could reliably book just a few small gigs a month, maybe playing a local bar or a wedding, and easily make his intensely optimized $1,000 a month living expenses.
Okay.
But more importantly, the $12,000 in the bank represented a full year of buffer if things went totally wrong. It was his psychological armor.
So what did he do?
He walked into his day job and quit. And he never had a traditional employer ever again. He bought his total, absolute, lifelong freedom for $12,000.
And the best part of the anecdote is the friend's reaction. When Seavers finishes the story, the friend is confused. He says, no, I meant, how did you get rich? What about when you sold CD Baby for millions?
Right, he totally missed the point.
And Seavers replies, no, that didn't make a big difference in my life. That was just more money in the bank. The difference happened when I was 22.
Exactly.
We are so conditioned to think of wealth as yachts and private jets, but here is a guy who achieved the absolute pinnacle of human wealth total autonomy living on $1,000 a month. So if we look at Seavers, is wealth really just a math equation? Is it just the gap between your ego and your income?
That is precisely the mechanism. Wealth is nothing more than the gap between your desires and your resources.
The gap between desires and resources.
Yes. Society tells us the only way to increase wealth is to aggressively increase our resources, our income. But the math of freedom shows us that if you can drastically lower your desires, if you can turn down the volume on your need for external validation and lower your baseline cost of living, you require significantly fewer resources to achieve the ultimate goal: control over your time.
Seavers wasn't rich at 22 because he had millions. He was rich because his $12,000 completely covered his humble cost of living and bought him 100% autonomy over his day.
Right. He woke up every morning in Manhattan, looked at the ceiling, and could say, I can do whatever I want today.
Okay, this is where we have to face a really uncomfortable reality.
Okay.
If the math of freedom is actually this simple, if it's just about managing the gap between our desires and our income to buy back our time, why is the United States, objectively the richest nation in the history of human civilization, failing this equation so spectacularly?
Yeah, that is the big question.
Because if we look at the macro data, there is a massive, glaring disconnect between our national wealth and our national well-being.
It is what we might call the Great American Paradox. And to understand it, we really have to look at the historical trajectory of wealth versus psychological state.
Break it down for me.
The United States, right now, is wealthier than it has ever been. By almost every objective economic metric, we are living in an era of unprecedented abundance.
Unprecedented.
But there is virtually no sociological or psychological evidence to suggest that the average citizen is any happier today than they were in the 1950s. And remember, in the 1950s, wealth and income were significantly lower, even when you adjust for inflation.
So we are making significantly more money in real terms. But the Campbell metric, our sense of well-being, is totally flatlined. Or actually, if we look at the data, we are actively feeling worse. Let's talk about the Gallup poll data.
Yes, the 2019 Gallup poll is a crucial piece of evidence here. This wasn't a small academic study. They surveyed 150,000 people across 140 different countries.
That's huge.
It is. They asked people about their emotional states the previous day, and the results for the U.S. were deeply alarming. 45% of Americans reported feeling a lot of worry the previous day.
Wow, almost half.
Right. And the global average for worry was only 39%. When it came to stress, the gap was even wider. 55% of Americans reported feeling a lot of stress the previous day, compared to a global average of just 35%.
So the wealthiest nation on the planet is significantly more worried and massively more stressed than the global average. How does that happen? If we didn't use all this unprecedented historical wealth to buy happiness or peace or autonomy, what did we buy?
We bought what we are culturally conditioned to buy: bigger, better, and more complex physical artifacts.
The stuff. We bought stuff.
Exactly. The hedonic treadmill accelerated. We used our greater wealth to expand our physical footprint and our material consumption. But, and here's the critical mechanism of the trap, in order to afford that vastly expanded physical footprint and to maintain it, we simultaneously surrendered more and more control over our time.
Oh, man.
The psychological joy provided by the new stuff was completely neutralized and often overpowered by the misery of the lost autonomy required to pay for it.
Let's look at the exact numbers of how our physical footprint expanded, because it perfectly illustrates your point about the hedonic treadmill.
Sure.
If we go back to 1955, the median family income, adjusted for inflation to modern dollars, was about $29,000. Fast forward to 2019, and that median income, again adjusted for inflation, had more than doubled to just over $62,000.
So we effectively doubled our real purchasing power.
Exactly. We had twice as much resource to work with, and what did we do with it? We supersized our cages.
Our cages, wow.
In 1950, the median American home was 983 square feet. By 2018, the median home was 2,436 square feet. We're living in houses that are 2.5 times larger. And there's a statistic about bathrooms that is just the peak of absurdity.
The bathroom statistic is the perfect sociological marker of our misallocated wealth.
I couldn't believe this when I read it.
The average new American home built today features more bathrooms than occupants.
More toilets than human beings.
Exactly. We are building massive, sprawling structures filled with empty rooms and redundant plumbing. We are buying cars that are faster, safer, and more efficient. We are buying televisions that are unbelievably cheap and razor sharp. If you look purely at the physical artifacts of our lives, they are undeniably superior to those in the 1950s. We have successfully engineered a material utopia.
But the psychological cost is hidden in the shadows of those 2,400 square foot houses. It makes you look at your own neighborhood differently. Are we all just financing our own captivity?
It's a harsh way to phrase it, but yes.
We are trading the ultimate dividend, our limited time on Earth, for depreciating assets. We willingly sign up to work 60 hours a week to pay the mortgage on a house with 4 bathrooms, but we are so busy working to pay for it that we are rarely home to actually live in it.
Yeah.
We sacrifice the one thing that reliably brings us joy, autonomy, to maintain physical spaces we don't even have time to inhabit.
It is a profound, systemic misallocation of resources. We are failing the wealth equation because we allowed our culturally conditioned desires to expand faster than our income.
The gap, right?
Right, the gap. By constantly moving the goalposts of what constitutes a normal life, from a 900 square foot house to a 2,400 square foot house, we ensure that we never actually generate enough surplus to buy our freedom. We are perpetually catching up to our own escalating desires.
It's exhausting just thinking about it.
But as dire as that consumer trap is, there is another layer to this problem that is arguably even more insidious.
Really? Worse than the bathrooms?
Yes. It isn't just that we are voluntarily working too much to pay for too much stuff. The very nature of how we earn our money, the fundamental mechanics of human labor, has undergone a radical shift since the 1950s. And this shift has trapped us in a cognitive prison that previous generations couldn't even conceptualize.
Right. It's not just a moral failing of buying too many flat-screen TVs. It's a structural evolution of the economy. To understand this, I want to go back in time again, way past the 1950s, to look at one of the richest men in human history, John D. Rockefeller. Because his working style in the late 19th century was considered bizarre then, but it perfectly mirrors our reality today.
Rockefeller is a fascinating lens through which to view the evolution of labor. As he was building Standard Oil into a globally dominant monopoly, his personal habits were a source of constant bewilderment to his contemporaries.
Because he didn't really do anything, right?
Right. He was famously reclusive. He spent the vast majority of his time by himself, and he rarely spoke in meetings. He deliberately made himself inaccessible to the daily operational noise. There's a great historical account from a refinery worker who once observed Rockefeller during a site visit and remarked, "He lets everybody else talk while he sits back and says nothing."
And there's that poem he used to recite when people questioned his silence. He would say, "A wise old owl lived in an oak. The more he saw, the less he spoke. The less he spoke, the more he heard. Why aren't we all like that wise old bird?"
Which is, a bit eccentric.
Honestly, it sounds super eccentric for a ruthless oil baron. But he had figured out a mode of working that was entirely alien to the 1870s workforce.
We have to analyze what Rockefeller's actual economic function was. What was his job? He wasn't out in the oil fields swinging a hammer to build a derrick. He wasn't physically loading heavy wooden barrels onto train cars. His entire economic value was derived from his ability to think.
He was a knowledge worker.
Exactly. His job was to analyze complex logistics, anticipate market movements, and make high-level decisions. His deliverable product wasn't created with his hands. It was synthesized inside his head. So sitting quietly in a room for hours on end might have looked like leisure or laziness to an outside observer. But internally, his cognitive engine was constantly firing, constantly working through complex problems.
And that was incredibly rare back then. If we look at the labor data compiled by economist Robert Gordon, the picture of the workforce in 1870 is almost entirely physical. 46% of all jobs in the United States were in agriculture. That means nearly half the country is out in the sun, physically working the land.
Right.
Another 35% were in crafts or manufacturing. You're shaping wood, forging steel, tanning leather. Over 80% of the workforce relied entirely on physical labor. You didn't get paid to think. You got paid to move your body and manipulate physical objects.
And here is the absolutely critical distinction between physical labor and modern cognitive labor. Physical work has a definitive structural endpoint.
Right.
When the sun goes down, the farmer physically cannot continue farming. When the factory whistle blows at 5:00 p.m., the machinist puts down the wrench and walks out the factory gates. You cannot build a locomotive in your living room because the tools of production remain at the factory. The work, by necessity, remains at the factory. The boundary between labor and leisure is physically enforced by the environment.
But today, that physical boundary has completely evaporated. If we look at the modern labor market, 38% of jobs are now designated as managers, officials, and professionals. These are pure decision-making roles. And another 41% are service jobs that rely heavily on cognitive and emotional labor. Roughly 80% of us are now working primarily with our minds, not our hands. We are essentially a workforce of mini Rockefellers, but without the billion-dollar safety net.
And the terrifying part of cognitive labor is that it doesn't have a whistle.
Oh, man. Yeah.
Because your tool of production is no longer a wrench or a plow. Your tool is your brain, and your brain goes home with you. This introduces a psychological mechanism known as the Zeigarnik effect.
Zeigarnik effect.
Yes, Russian psychologist Bluma Zeigarnik discovered that the human brain is hardwired to remember uncompleted or interrupted tasks far better than completed ones. If you are a physical laborer and you finish your quota of widgets, your brain clocks out. But if you are a knowledge worker, your tasks are rarely finished.
There's always another email, another strategy document, another marketing campaign to optimize.
Precisely. The Zeigarnik effect ensures that your brain keeps churning through those incomplete cognitive tasks long after you've left the physical office. It's like having dozens of background apps running on your smartphone.
Draining your battery.
Yes. Even when the screen is dark, even when you were sitting on your couch trying to watch a movie, those background apps are quietly draining your battery. Your processor is still running. You might physically be cooking dinner for your family or commuting on the train or jolting awake at 3:00 a.m., but mentally you are on the factory floor.
Wow.
You might technically log fewer official hours than a 19th century farmer, but the psychological burden of the work feels constant. It feels 24/7.
There is a quote from Derek Thompson, a writer for The Atlantic, that captures this modern nightmare perfectly. He wrote, "If the operating equipment of the 21st century is a portable device, this means the modern factory is not a place at all. It is the day itself. The computer age has liberated the tools of productivity from the office. Most knowledge workers, whose laptops and smartphones are portable, all-purpose media-making machines, can theoretically be as productive at 2 p.m. in the main office as at 2 a.m. in a Tokyo WeWork or at midnight on the couch."
The modern factory is the day itself. That is one of the most chillingly accurate observations of modern life.
That really is.
Technology dissolved the boundaries of time and space that used to protect our autonomy. We carry the assembly line in our pockets. We sleep with the factory floor resting on our nightstands.
It's the ultimate tragic irony. It's almost like a sci-fi curse. The exact technological tools that were aggressively marketed to us as the keys to ultimate freedom, the laptops and smartphones that were supposed to let us work a 4-hour week from a beach in Bali, are the exact same tools that transformed our entire existence into an inescapable cognitive prison.
Because we are always reachable and always capable of producing, there is an implicit, unspoken expectation that we should always be producing.
And now, bring this all the way back to Angus Campbell's research from the beginning of our deep dive. Campbell proved that a strong sense of controlling your time is the single most dependable predictor of happiness.
Right.
But what has happened to our control? Through the combination of the hedonic treadmill forcing us to work more to pay for bigger houses, and the technological shift turning the entire day into a factory, our objective control over our time has been decimated. Even when we aren't officially on the clock, the capacity to work and the mental burden of the Zeigarnik effect is ever present.
So when we look at those Gallup poll numbers, when we see a historically wealthy nation drowning in unprecedented worry and stress, It isn't a paradox at all.
No.
It is the perfectly logical outcome of a society that traded its autonomy for portable devices and extra bathrooms.
Okay, this is a heavy realization.
It is.
We've diagnosed the trap. We see how the loss of control triggers reactance, poisoning our passions. We see how we've inflated our desires, financing our own lack of freedom. And we see how the invisible factory of the smartphone keeps our brains tethered to the assembly line 24 hours a day. The obvious, desperate question is, how do we get out?
That's the billion-dollar question.
How do we break this conditioning when every billboard and algorithm is telling us to buy more and work harder? It feels like we are playing a game with rigged rules. So, if we want to figure out how to navigate the game of life, we should probably consult the people who've already finished playing it. We need to look at the ultimate audit of the human experience.
This is where the work of Karl Pillemer becomes incredibly valuable. Pillemer is a gerontologist, a scientist who studies aging, and he wrote a phenomenal book called 30 Lessons for Living.
What makes his book so special?
Well, what makes this book so authoritative isn't just Pillemer's theories, it's his methodology. He recognized that the elderly possess a unique psychological vantage point. In psychology, there is a concept related to socio-emotional selectivity theory, which essentially suggests that as people's time horizons shrink, as they realize they have less time ahead of them than behind them, their priorities drastically clarify.
The noise just falls away.
Exactly. The superficial noise falls away. So Pillemer went out and conducted deep, extensive interviews with 1,000 elderly Americans. He was looking for the hard-won wisdom, the synthesized lessons of what actually mattered over an 80 or 90-year lifespan, and more importantly, what the biggest mistakes were.
And when you ask 1,000 people who are looking back at the entirety of the 20th century, you would expect a wide variety of answers, right? You'd expect different philosophies on money, career, and success.
You think so?
But what Pillemer found wasn't a scatterplot of opinions. It was practically unanimous. The clarity of their perspective completely eviscerates the way most of us are currently living. I want to share the three main findings regarding wealth and work, and I'm going to emphasize the exact phrasing Pillemer uses, because the absolute nature of the data is stunning.
Please do.
First, no one, not a single person out of 1,000, said that to be happy, you should try to work as hard as you can to make money to buy the things you want.
Let that sink in for a minute. 1,000 people reflecting on a century of living, and not one single individual validated the core driving premise of modern consumer capitalism.
Not one.
Not one person on their deathbed said, you know what really brought me joy? Working those extra weekends so I could afford the luxury SUV instead of the sedan. When the timeline of life stretches out to its end, the material accumulation is universally recognized as a completely hollow pursuit.
It gets even more specific regarding the social pressure we feel. Second point, no one, not a single person, said it's important to be at least as wealthy as the people around you. And if you have more than they do, it's real success.
That completely invalidates the entire concept of keeping up with the Joneses. That visible external scorecard we discussed at the very beginning, comparing your house size, your vacations, your clothes to your neighbors, is revealed to be a total illusion.
The complete waste of energy.
The elders realize that social comparison is a game you can never win, and the only prize for playing is the forfeiture of your own peace.
And the final point, which brings us right back to the investment banking intern whose passion was destroyed by a lack of control. No one, not a single person, said you should choose your work based on your desired future earning power.
This presents a profound, almost aggressive challenge to how we are currently operating. We have an entire generation of young people taking on massive debt to pursue degrees and careers they don't even care about, simply because the expected future earning power is high. But if 1,000 elders are screaming back at us from the finish line, telling us that sacrificing our autonomy for earning power is a guaranteed path to regret, why do we keep running the same doomed playbook? If they didn't value the money, the status, or the stuff, what did they value when all the noise faded?
The data is incredibly clear on this too. When the superficial layers burned away, what remained were the fundamental human connections. They valued quality, enduring friendships. They valued being part of something bigger than themselves, contributing to a local community, a charity, a cause.
Yeah.
And crucially, above almost everything else, they valued spending quality, unstructured time with their children. There's a summary quote from Pillemer's findings that every single person listening to this right now needs to absorb. It says, your kids don't want your money or what your money buys anywhere near as much as they want you. Specifically, they want you with them.
They want you with them. It is so simple and yet so easily forgotten in the daily grind. They don't want the latest gaming console. They don't want the designer clothes. They don't want the massive house with the empty bathrooms. And they certainly don't care about your job title.
They just want you.
They want your undivided presence. They want your time. The pursuit of material wealth at the expense of time is universally recognized as a catastrophic error in judgment by those who have the perspective of a full lifetime. The message from the elders is a warning. Take control of your time now, because you cannot buy it back later at any price.
It makes you look at your own evening routine entirely differently, doesn't it? It makes you ask hard questions. Are you currently building a life where your wealth buys you more time with your family, or are you buying more stuff to distract them while you answer emails at 9 p.m.? How often do we put on a movie for the kids or hand them an iPad just so we can retreat to the kitchen island and clear out our inbox? We rationalize it. We convince ourselves we are doing it to provide for them. We are working the invisible factory shift to pay for the big house they live in. But the data clearly shows that the one thing they actually want, the only thing that matters in the final audit of life, is us. Our time.
Are we strategically using our resources to buy back our autonomy, or are we just binding ourselves tighter to the machine?
Man, okay. It is the most vital, clarifying audit you can perform on your own life.
Let's synthesize everything we have unpacked today, because we covered a lot of ground.
Please do.
We began with Angus Campbell proving through rigorous demographic data that autonomy, the simple daily control over your schedule, is the most robust predictor of human happiness, far outweighing objective wealth. We explored the evolutionary biology of reactance, seeing how forced schedules completely neutralize our internal passions.
Like the investment banking intern.
Exactly. Then we learned the mathematical reality of wealth from Derek Sivers, that building a buffer of unspent assets, no matter how small, buys incremental freedom, shifting you from desperation to strategy. We confronted the great American paradox, recognizing that our vast historical wealth has been squandered on a hedonic treadmill of physical excess, like extra bathrooms.
Still can't get over that stat.
We identified the invisible factory of the mind, driven by the Zeigarnik effect and smartphones that keeps us perpetually on the clock. And finally, we listened to the unanimous voices of 1,000 elders who confirmed that the true, lasting currency of a life well lived is human connection and unstructured time.
Every single piece of evidence, from the psychologist to the economist to the gerontologist, points to one inescapable conclusion. Controlling your time is the absolute highest dividend money pays, period.
No question about it.
But as we wrap up this deep dive, I have to mention how the source material ends, because it does something brilliant. It leaves us on a cliffhanger. The very last sentence of the text we explored today is a teaser for the next chapter. It says, now, a short chapter on one of the lowest dividends money pays.
It is a masterful transition. And while the text we have today doesn't explicitly reveal what that lowest dividend is, the entire framework we've built over the last hour provides the perfect lens for us to figure it out ourselves.
Exactly. We aren't going to guess what the author wrote next. Instead, we are going to leave you with a powerful homework assignment. Take a hard look at your bank statement today. Look at your credit card bill. If the absolutely highest dividend your money can pay is buying back your time, your autonomy, and your peace of mind, what are you currently spending money on that represents the lowest dividend?
That's a great question.
What are you purchasing, subscribing to, or financing that is actively stealing your time, demanding your maintenance, and tying you down to the invisible factory?
It's definitely something to think about.
We want to thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We hope this reframing of wealth gives you the tools to audit your own life. But mostly, we hope that tomorrow or next week or someday very soon, you get to wake up on a random morning, look at the ceiling, feel that total drop in cortisol, and know deep in your bones, I can do whatever I want today.